All right, I'm going to get started here today. Hello, everybody. Thank you all so very much for joining us here for the Charles Stanley webinar, all about how to make the most of your retirement, how to retire comfortably. This is a huge and very important topic. So my name is Erica White, and I will be the host of your session for today. So throughout the course of the next hour or so, I'll be joined by some of my fabulous and very, very knowledgeable colleagues, each of whom are going to talk us through everything that we need to know when planning for retirement. This is a very new and exciting chapter of life that if you're tuned into this call, you're obviously thinking about, as you should be. It's very, very important stuff. Before I do dive into this agenda, though, I'm going to do just a little bit of housekeeping first. But before I do, I just want to share a little fact that might surprise some of you and might not surprise some of you, actually. The number one source of stress for UK adults is money. So that's above family duties, work, health, or anything else. It is money. So facing into that, spending even just a little bit of time getting to know your finances, getting your finances organized, making an action plan for your money, those are all huge relievers of that stress. I'm sure that many of you have heard the very famous phrase that knowledge is power, and this really truly is the case when it does come to your finances. So well done to each and every one of you for logging in today, for joining us here for what we're hoping is a very informative, clear, and engaging webinar all about retirement. Okay, so some housekeeping time. As mentioned in our email communications, we just want to remind you guys that the session is best viewed on an actual computer or on a laptop, not on a mobile or a tablet. So if you're currently tuning in from a tablet or from your phone, our recommendation is to switch to watching us from the laptop or desktop computer instead, or you might not be able to read the slides that we've created here for you, which kind of does defeat the purpose. We've worked very hard on all of these slides. Would love for you guys to be able to read them with ease. Another reminder here, when you're looking at the screen right now, the slides with the text that you're currently seeing, so those images, should be the largest box on the screen. And if that is not the case, please do go ahead and click the top right-hand button that says View, then select Speaker Mode, and you should be able to read and enjoy the slides with ease as this session does continue. So we've done our very best to create what we're hoping is a really informative and an interesting webinar for you guys. And we do expect tons and tons of questions throughout, which we are so looking forward to answering. That's one real highlight for us here at CS. But please do keep in mind that the experts that we'll be hearing from today are not allowed to give specific individual financial advice. So if you're wanting to pop some questions into the chat box as they come up, we absolutely do hope that you do, but please do try to phrase the questions in kind of broader terms as opposed to asking like specific numerical questions or anything about individual stocks or anything too nitty-gritty on this forum, because unfortunately we're going to have to skip over anything that's too detailed, which we absolutely do not want to be doing. We want the chance to answer as many questions as possible given the time constraints, of course. Final thing that I'll say here before we dive into the session, we will be sending out this recording with the corresponding slides alongside it in a follow-up email. So please do look out for that. Okay, let's take a look at the agenda for today. We're going to be starting this session off with an overview with talking through some of the main retirement challenges and look at some research around that we've had done. It's some fascinating stuff. We will then jump into the details of how much people need in retirement. There is definitely a range here, of course. We've got you all covered. We will then discuss the different types of pensions and sources of income in retirement, managing investment, that's a big one here, our big do's and don'ts of retirement planning, and then finally, we're going to be opening up the floor to a Q&A session and review some key dates with our experts. So this is your chance to access our professionals with any questions you might have. This is a great time to be chatting with them, and they are so looking forward to answering those questions. So now it is time for me to introduce our very first expert onto the floor here today. I'm going to be welcoming Lisa Kaplan onto the floor here, our OneStep Financial Planning Director here at Charles Stanley. So Lisa is a chartered financial planner using technology to make it easier for people to move forward towards financial well-being. What she does is she combines digital experience and financial planning knowledge gained over 13 years working in the personal finance space, and is the perfect person to guide us through this part. Hi, Lisa, how are you?
Hi, Erica. Thanks for that introduction. And
The floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Retirement challenges. There are specific things when thinking about retirement that doesn't really come up in other parts of financial planning. So I'm just going to introduce what those are. The investment strategy is different when you're paying yourself money from your investments to retire. And my colleague Rob is going to go into some detail about that later on. What I'm going to be covering is spending. How much do you need? And I'll talk about sort of the U shape of spending in retirement. I'm going to talk about longevity, because if we all knew exactly how long we were planning for, life would be much easier, but we don't. So how do we manage that? Related to that is sort of well-being, health, and legacy. And then also a word or two about taxes and inflation. And related to that, of course, are the different ways, different pots you can access to spend in retirement. Laura, can I have the next slide, please? So we did a bit of research with roughly 2,000 people, and I've just chosen some nuggets that came out of that for me. I'm not going to go through it in detail. You'll get the slides afterwards. But what struck me chimes with what Erica was saying about people worrying about their finances. When preparing for their retirement, 55% of people are using cash savings, 45% are using their home, and a third are using ISAs. So people, it's not just about the pension is really the point I want to make. It's about other savings as well, and you should expect that. National insurance, what struck me is how people just don't know how long it takes to build up the national insurance record so that you get a full state pension. I'm going to cover that in more detail because I think it's really important that people understand what they can get and how that works. A lot of people just don't know, and I think they should, and I want to help with that. Less than half of people have ever checked their national insurance record, and men are much more likely to have done that than women. Next slide, please. What was interesting is many people need to supplement their pensions, and that's fine. What was interesting for me was that 7% of people working full-time plan to work full-time past the age of retirement. And that chimes a lot with people that I speak to. They say, oh, I'm going to be working forever. And a number of people I speak to actually like the idea of continuing to work. They find work stimulating. And that's reflected in the next piece there, is that 45% of retirees took on extra work to keep themselves mentally stimulated, and they work for personal fulfillment. But also 26% did so to fund day-to-day activities, which is more concerning. The reason those don't add up to 100 is because you can do one, you could multi-choose from that list. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so we're talking about spending and what do you need in retirement. The Retirement Living Standards Organization do research every year, and these are their figures. They look at single people and they look at couples, and they compare comfortable, moderate, and minimum needs. In my next slide, I'll go into more detail about what that is. But for a couple to have a comfortable lifestyle in retirement, that would cost them £55,000 a year. So they would need after-tax money of £55,000 to live comfortably. And they're sort of comparing that to a single person, it's £37,000 because clearly there's some common spending that covers both of you. But for a minimum standard of living, for a single person, that's £13,000. The maximum, the full state pension is less than that. It's 10,600, so there will be a gap. For a couple, if they both have full state pensions, they're covered for the minimum requirement and could look for other assets for moderate and comfortable things. If we go into the next slide, we'll see what that is. So, I mean, really what the minimum lifestyle truly is minimum. We're talking about eating out once a month, limited activity, and one UK-based holiday per year. And it's also worth mentioning that these figures don't include any cost for accommodation. It's assuming that there's no mortgage, there's no rent, that your house is owned outright, which is fair enough for people retiring now as a broad assumption, but maybe less so in the future. Also, these are national figures for London. It's not dramatically different for London because the main cost of living difference is in terms of housing, but it's an extra couple of £1,000 perhaps across all three. If you look at, sorry, and the other thing to note there, that 3/4 of employees will meet that minimum standard. In terms of moderate, it's a little more comfortable. It's one foreign holiday a year and eating out a few times a month and that sort of thing. And that is, roughly speaking, half of employees are covered up to a moderate standard of living. And then if you look at comfortable, that £37,000 that I was mentioning, essentially that's really about flexibility and spontaneity. We're looking at beauty treatments, we're looking at 2 holidays a year, and just having more flexibility to do enjoyable things. That is more the retirement that everybody wants, and only 1 out of 6 people are on track for that sort of retirement. So a lot less than everybody else. There's a link there if you want more details. They're going to, excruciating detail about how these are made up. But I think they're a good way of understanding what you might need to spend to have the sort of lifestyle that you want. Laura, the next slide, please. Okay, so where can you get that money to fund your retirement? And the first place, I want to divide that between fixed and variable. I've put fixed in inverted commas because actually these things do increase with inflation, generally speaking. But they're things, that's why they're fixed, but they do increase. So firstly, the state pension, 10,600 a year if you've got a full NI record. What that means is 35 years of contributions of national insurance. I strongly recommend, if you haven't done so already, that you go to gov.uk and find out what your national insurance record is, or Google national insurance record and it'll take you to the right place. You do have to get through the government gateway and the security checks, and that's fine if but there's a wealth of information. You will see year by year what your record is and what your contributions are. The good news for women is that people looking after small children are covered. They get a credit for those years from when the child is 12, which can make a big difference. If you're short of years, you can buy back years, and I encourage you to do that sooner rather than later. It's going to change at the end of July. You'll still be able to buy years, but it'll cost you more to be less flexible. In terms of the cost for buying back extra years of national insurance, so you get a full state pension, it pays for itself pretty quickly after 4 years or so. So well worth doing, and do check that. If you take one thing away, I think you should do that. The other source of fixed income are salary-based pensions, increasingly rare, especially in the private sector. A lot of companies don't offer these anymore, but they basically give you a percentage of your salary in perpetuity going up with inflation. Some of them, they are usually index linked to inflation, but sometimes have a cap. For example, the BP pension, I was talking to someone the other day about the BP pension, that's capped at 5%. So if inflation is less than 5%, you get that. But if it's more than 5%, as it is at the moment, you get just 5%. And the final source of fixed income is annuities, where essentially you take your pension funds, you give them to an insurance company, and you buy a fixed amount of income for the rest of your life. rates improve as you get older and if you're ill. And there are different sorts that you can buy. You can buy those that are linked to inflation. You can buy level where it's just the same amount. You can buy an extra bit that goes to your spouse after you die, and there are various guarantees. I've got some numbers later on to go in with that. And then the variable sources of income. So drawing down from your personal pension as and when you need it. So for example, you just have an expense that you want to meet, you can just take that money out of your pension. The first 25% is tax-free and the rest is simply taxed to your income. It's added to the rest of your income and you're taxed accordingly. So you can be clever about staying underneath various tax thresholds like basic rate and higher rate of tax and the personal allowance. Then there's natural income, such as interests from your savings and dividends from your investments. And then there are other investments that you can draw down as well, ISAs, investment bonds, and sort of a general investment account, which isn't particularly tax wrap. You're somewhere where you've put your investments. Can I have the next slide, please?
Lisa, we just have a quick question here just before we change this slide. We have a question submitted by an audience member. Thank you very much, Steve, for this. Steve has asked, he said, did I understand correctly? You said that the cost of paying for missing an NI contribution will increase from July. I know that some years can no longer be topped up from July, but didn't know the cost was going to change.
Yes, I mean, in short, I believe the cost is going to go up after July. They've held it, but it is going to go up. And yeah, after July, you'll only be able to buy the previous 6 years. Now you can buy.
So you would encourage people to get on this sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend it's easy to go onto the website and do it, but to actually speak to someone, you have to be quite patient as well.
I hear you. Okay. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Next slide, please. And by the way, I love these questions. It's really it's good for me. So there are two types of pensions: the defined benefit scheme, which I mentioned just now, where it's a company. They're increasingly rare. The main thing I want to say about this is they're valuable benefits, and in general, it's usually better to keep a defined benefit scheme than to trade it in for the value. And it's hard to get advice, positive advice, to do so, because generally speaking, it's not a good idea. Sometimes it is. And the main benefit is you get a guaranteed, with a little g, amount of income based on that pension. You're not taking the investment risk. The pension company or the employer is taking on that risk. And then there's a defined contribution scheme, which is a sort of personal pensions. So these would be employee pensions, the occupational pensions, but also self-invested personal pensions. And I know Rob's going to go into more detail about the difference between the two. Essentially, you and your employer pay into the pension. It's invested in stock market, so the values can rise and fall. There are huge tax advantages of the contribution, but as I said, it can convert it into a guaranteed income through an annuity, or you are now allowed to just draw down on it, either regularly in an ad hoc way. The point to make about those schemes is people often don't know that they, in terms of inheritance tax, can be quite useful in that they're not regarded in general as part of your estate. They're outside of your estate, so there's no inheritance tax to pay on your death, and you can instruct the pension company to pay to whoever you want. It doesn't have to be the spouse anymore, which can be useful with inheritance tax planning. It can be a child, it can be it can be a trust, it can really be anybody. So if you're drawing down money to cover expenses, you may want to, if inheritance tax is an issue for you, you may want to draw money from somewhere else first. The next slide,
Lisa,
please.
I'm just going to hop on here. Sorry, if you're okay with this, I'm just going to keep.
I'm okay. Sure.
Okay. Question here from an audience member: can you pay into more than one personal pension and still get tax relief on both?
Yes, you can. You get tax relief on the lower of your taxable income, your taxable earned income. So that's your salary, really, salary and bonus. So the lower of your earned income and £60,000 a year. But it doesn't have to be in one pension. Many people have an occupational pension and are still contributing to a self-invested personal pension. I mean, at Charles Stanley Direct, we have a few clients like this who are contributing to their SIPP with us and an occupational scheme.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Another 2 more questions here, if that's okay. Does the 10,600 figure for the state pension include the full NI contribution record, or is it a variable level added on beyond that figure, depending on your contribution record?
It depends. If you have a full contribution record of 35 years, you will get the full state pension, which is 10,600 per year. So if you have less than that, you'll get proportionately less. And if you've got less than 10 years, you'll get nothing.
Right, right. And then final question here from somebody saying, if I have 39 years NI contribution and the state pension forecast shows the max amount, I was contracted out, so there is also a contracted out pension equivalent, in brackets COPE, estimated provided. Do I deduct the COPE estimate from the forecast to determine what I'll actually get as the state pension?
Contracting out is a bit complicated. I'm happy to talk to that person afterwards.
Separately,
if get in touch, but that'll be reflected in your NI record. It's complicated. I don't want to take too much time up now. I'm happy to talk afterwards.
Absolutely, and we will have your email address up for contact.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to disappear now. Thank you so much,
okay.
Lisa.
Next slide, please. Okay, so then I said I would talk about longevity. There's a rather, I don't know, worrying, reassuring, depending how you take it. The Office for National Statistics have a life expectancy calculator on their website. You put in your age and your sex, and it tells you the average life expectancy. So I put in a 65-year-old woman, and her average life expectancy would be 87 years. So that's another 27 years from her 65th birthday. But then also, if you look on the right, there's a 25% chance she'll live to 94. So it's another 39 years. There is a 10% chance she'll live to 98. And she actually has a 5% chance of living to 100. So that's another 45 years, which creates the challenge in sort of planning for retirement. It's useful to know what the average life expectancy is, but you just don't know where you're going to be. So when I'm doing planning with people, what I do is I say, here's the Office for National Statistics average life expectancy. We can run the model up to 100, or we can add 5 years so that you know that you're secure and safe. But I think it's a good mental exercise to say, okay, if I stop work at 65, I've got to have enough resources so that I can live the life I want to live until I am 87 or 94. And that's the sort of planning you have to do, and this helps you think that way. Have a look. It can be quite surprising. So different ways of taking money from a pension. I mentioned the annuity, regular drawdown, ad hoc drawdown, and then the other thing is watch out for tax. So next slide. Okay, so I imagine that 65-year-old person. So this is what they want to spend and what they, how their life may play out, and their different sources of income. So the blue at the bottom is the state pension, and then this person, she happened to have some DB pension, which pays out over her life. Then she tops up that income with drawing down from her pensions until she's 80, at which point she trades in some of her pension for an annuity and she gets some money. But then her expenses go up again and she covers that with drawdown. I'm using this to illustrate the U shape of retirement. In early retirement, you're excited. There's lots of stuff you want to do, travel, enjoy life. Then things settle down and you become less able to do things. And then in later years, you have to pay for care. So that's the U shape of retirement. And there are different sources of income, some fixed. And I would say try and get the fixed to cover your basic expenses at least. And then the variable you can do from drawdown from pensions or from other ways, but each of them has their own tax treatment, and it's important to keep that in mind. Can I have the next one, please? Okay, I talked about annuities and their different flavors. I updated the slide yesterday because annuity rates really have improved over the last year or so. But with inflation, annuity, the good news is annuity rates also tend to get better. If you take £100,000 and you go to an insurance company, the Pru, Aviva, whoever, and say, I want to buy an annuity, they will take your £100,000, say, thank you very much, and they will undertake to give you £7,000 for the rest of your life without any increase with inflation. If you wanted to increase with inflation, they will give you less now, but that number will go up with inflation. So they would give you £4,500 a year. And then if you have a spouse and you want to say, if I die, I want half of my pension to go to my spouse, the cost of that goes up a bit, depending on the age of the spouse. In this, I said the spouse was the same age, but the younger the spouse, the lower the income you're going to get. And 50% spousal income annuity would give you 6,600 a year level, or 3,700 increasing with inflation. And you can see there's quite a big step down there in terms of the income. So you need to think, well, how, should I get the index link? Should I get the level? And, those are decisions you might look for some help with. Also, this is for a 65-year-old in good health. If you're not in good health, you can get special annuities, which pay you a lot more. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm talking about tax. The ways in which you can get tax-free income have decreased quite sharply over the last few years. The personal allowance has stayed the same, but what's happening is there's inflation, so people's income is getting bigger, so it covers less. The personal allowance is the amount of income you can earn without paying any tax, and that is £12,570. Then there's the personal savings allowance, which for a basic rate taxpayer is £1,000. That stayed the same. But the dividend allowance, which is the orange part of that bar, has fallen from 2,000 in 2023 to 1,000 next year, and it's going to fall to 500 next year. So what that really, in previous years, I could fund an ISA easily by selling shares in my general account and putting it into my ISA account, and I wouldn't have enough difference there. And that's what I'm relating to the top one there, which is the capital gains tax allowance. That has fallen from 12,300 last year to 6,000 this year and 3,000 next year, which means it can be quite difficult to fund your ISA without triggering a capital gains tax charge. But capital gains tax is still a lot lower than income tax, 28% if you're a higher rate versus 40%. So it's just harder to get enough income without paying tax at the moment. Next slide, please. So in summary, it's be realistic about what you need to spend. I hope the numbers I've given have been helpful, but they'll be different for you. Then add sort of your extras, your lifestyle things. Think about the U shape of retirement. So spending in the early years, enjoying life, but then keeping enough so that if you need to pay for care later, you can. Do some homework in terms of annuities, and also, obviously, I'm going to say about checking your national insurance contributions. And if you want to contact me, if you've got a question or you want to chat, I'm very happy to talk, and my email address is on the screen. I think that's it from me for now.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that. We will be hearing from Lisa again in the Q&A portion. And we do see these questions coming in. They're absolutely awesome. We will be trying to get to every single one within the Q&A portion, which will happen when we're done with our next panelist, which actually leads me right in perfectly to let you guys know that it is time now to hear from our next expert, Rob Morgan, a familiar face to anybody in the CSD world. So Rob Morgan is the Chief Analyst and Spokesperson for Charles Stanley Direct. With over 20 years experience in financial services, Rob has worked as a financial advisor, a pension specialist, and an investment analyst, and he currently specializes in researching actively managed funds and regularly writes about investments, markets, and personal finance. Rob, if you are there, then the floor is yours.
Lovely. Okay, well, I'm going to talk a little more about investing for income to supplement those fixed or guaranteed incomes that Lisa mentioned, and really treat this as a bit of an intro. But I think the first thing to understand is that your choice of investments is going to be dictated somewhat by the pension type that you have. So whether, for instance, you have a personal pension or a similar vehicle, perhaps a group personal pension from work, a workplace scheme that you've had for a while, or it's something a bit more flexible, like a SIPP, a self-invested personal pension, which tends to have a lot more in terms of investment choices, especially for those who want to be really sort of more hands-on with those. And a kind of standard personal pension will have a range of funds, diversified collective investments that invest in the stock market or other assets, albeit that might be a fairly limited number, but it depends on the scheme really. And those that have group personal pensions, perhaps from their work life, might find that the charges on those are actually quite attractive because you're part of a wide scheme. SIPPs, meanwhile, are much broader from an investment perspective. Possibly you'll have a much wider range of funds. There's several thousand funds, for instance, available from the Charles Stanley Direct SIPP, as well as exchange traded funds, investment trusts, shares, both UK and overseas. So lots more options for those who want to be hands-on. And that would apply as well to tax efficient ISAs as well. They can be a good source of income with tax-free withdrawals, albeit with no tax relief on the way in. But either way, it's possible to build a portfolio that suits your objectives, the risk level that you're happy with, and to set up a facility to take income and or lump sums to help fund your retirement. But there are some challenges involved in doing that, because there's lots of differences between an investment strategy building up assets compared with one that's actually drawing on them. One analogy I like to use, if we go to the next slide, please, is where it's sometimes observed in mountaineering, where it's more dangerous going down than it is going up. It might take less time and feel the sort of hard part is that way, but often in the descent, it's where you're whether you find out whether your planning worked out, it's when fatigue might set in, take its toll, and your supplies can run out. So investing for retirement, hopefully not as dramatic as all that, but it does mean some of the same principles can apply. And during your working life, you've got a few things on your side when you're investing and building up that pot, and it can be sort of relatively straightforward, I suppose, in terms of allowing regular investing and the compounding of returns over the years to help propel you along and build that pot up. And you can have a relatively simple set and forget portfolio, perhaps, allow a bit of rebalancing, using pound cost averaging, so buying at different intervals along the way that can help iron out the volatility of markets and actually benefit a bit from the volatility that markets provide. So managing things for yourself during that phase can be a bit more a bit straightforward. So on retirement, it's a bit harder. Do you have enough resources at your disposal? What's the best way to maximize those? And what if something unexpected happens? So one reason why managing investments in retirement is more difficult is that sort of pound cost averaging and buying the dips maybe not an option. You can't top up when the markets fall and take advantage of lower asset prices. So that's when volatility can actually become an enemy rather than a friend. So you have to be thinking about that. So the big risks that you'll be dealing with, besides the market volatility, inflation as well, and longevity, which Lisa has already mentioned. So just moving on, really, because Lisa's already covered those in some depth. So on to the next slide. So If you're withdrawing from an investment portfolio, it's not the long-term average return that matters, but the sequence of returns. So bad performance in the early years can actually be quite costly, especially if it's then you're withdrawing from the pot, so to a great extent. So it makes it more difficult to bounce back, and volatility can be a drag. And on the next slide, I've got an example of how this this can work. And we're looking at sort of 3 investors here, and just to set the scene, they're all getting the same average return over 10 years, and that's 5% per annum. That's the 10-year average. Now, most people will hope and aim for more than that level, but I'm using that just to keep things simple. So investor A, they get a fairly even or completely even 5% return each year. Now, investors B and C get around about 5% each year as well, but it's not evenly distributed. So that's closer to reality, really, because markets give us obviously lots of different outcomes over different timeframes. And investor B has some good years at the start, and it tails off, and they have the bad years at the end. And with investor C, it's the other way around. They have some bad years at the start, and it improves with the good years at the end. So if we go to the next slide, this is what happens if those investors are investing for growth accumulation. They all start with £100,000. There's no withdrawals, and as you'd expect, investor B starts off well and then dips. Investor A just goes straight on through the middle with 5% metronomic returns, and investor C has a poor start but then catches up. So they all end up in the same place, and they've got the same amount after 10 years. So the order of returns didn't matter. But what happens if these investors start taking withdrawals from their portfolio? Now, on the next slide is exactly the same scenario, with the difference that they each take out £5,000 a year. If we just move on to the next one, please. Yeah, so because they're taking their money out, there's now a big difference. Now, investor A, they're the ones that's getting the uniform level of return, steady 5%, and that 5% perfectly fits their £5,000 withdrawal. So their pot size remains at the £100,000. And that basically stays the same. Investor C has depleted their capital. They've taken their £5,000 when markets are falling in those early years, and when returns were poor. And that's made recovery more difficult compared with investor B with exactly the same income strategy. They had the good years at the start. They took their fixed returns of £5,000, but they ended up with a much bigger pot at the end. So the average returns that those two investors got is the same, but they were unfortunate. They had the volatility, the difficult years at the start. And that's why asset allocation really matters in retirement. And taking too much in those early years can combine with volatility to drain an investment pot. So that's why we say that for those in drawdown or drawing from their investments in retirement, the journey is just as important as the destination. Whereas if you're in accumulation, if you're building up your assets, it's really just the destination that matters. So how can you combat these risks? So if we move to the next slide, please. It is easier said than done, but diversification will help. So populating a portfolio with various asset classes that move independently of one another rather than in unison can help smooth out those returns. Not always easy, and in fact, as we've seen, during 2022, with bonds and equities falling in tandem, it made for some really big challenges for investors. Going forward, hopefully, we think that sort of level of diversification will help, but it's not a silver bullet. Taking a sustainable level will help. It's been argued that if you withdraw sort of 3 or 4% a year, you should be relatively safe, given the normal level of returns. But assumptions based on sort of long-term averages can be a bit dangerous. So we can't really provide a kind of safe level. It's going to depend on other resources and various factors such as market returns, longevity, and inflation. You can also adapt to changing conditions. In the example I showed, investor C with the poor performance in the early years could have forgone some income in those those earlier years to help keep more of the pot intact, to help generate future returns, waiting to increase withdrawals when markets are kinder. You could always keep a cash reserve. That's not optimal in terms of investment returns, usually for the long term, but does give you a buffer. So when markets fall, don't deliver, you can draw from the cash, and it's a reasonable thing to consider doing. Finally, it's really important to take the right level of risk. You're going to need to take some risk to grow your money, but you will need to try and control volatility if you're going to be taking regular withdrawals as well, especially in those early years. So it is hard, and if you're in doubt, it's really a good idea to seek advice in that area. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. Just by way of a summary, some do's and don'ts before I pass back to Lisa and we move on to Q&A. Do be prepared, get all the information that you need. Lisa mentioned your national insurance record, really important for the state pension. Get your state pension forecast and look at your other pensions for modelling purposes and get all the relevant statements in place. Assess all your retirement options. What's the best mix of retirement income to supplement your state pension and other guaranteed income? Is an annuity best? We've seen that the rates are quite attractive right now, but they do move around according to what bond yields are doing. And if you're carrying on investing, what's the best way to structure your withdrawals, and what's the best investment strategy to achieve that? Be tax aware. If you're looking at taking big withdrawals from your pension, then you need to think about the income tax that's payable on that, which Lisa's already touched on. Don't end up with an unexpected tax bill if you take a great big lump from your pension. And don't underestimate your life expectancy. Without getting too morbid, take a look at the ONS life expectancy calculator that Lisa highlighted. And very importantly, don't fall victim to scams. It's such a massive issue, and every year thousands of people fall victim to investment fraud, I'm afraid, and those big with pension pots are a target. So always be vigilant, be really highly skeptical of unsolicited investment offers, and always use an authorised financial business. And now I think probably ready to move on to Q&A.
So first question for you, Lisa, if that's okay with you. Is the IHT exemption for life, or does it end at 75? Great question.
It is for life, but there is a change at 75, which is before you're 75, any unused pension passes without any tax whatsoever. But after you're 75, it's treated as income in the hands of the recipient. So when they draw that money out into their own bank accounts, it's taxed on them as income. But that is the change at 75.
Okay, there we go. Next question here for you, Lisa. Lots of great questions here, which is so nice to see. We love to answer these questions here. So if I have 39 years NI contribution, do I have to keep contributing?
If you're working, your employer will take it. And if you're earning money as a self-employed person, you will have to pay national insurance contributions. That's the law. You can make voluntary contributions, but if you've already got 39 years, I question whether that's worthwhile, because 35 years full NI contributions is as far as you can go, pretty much.
Great, thank you so much for that. Next question here. If you do regular drawdown from multiple pension sources using the 25% tax-free on the drawdown instead of lump sum, what records do you need to keep to show that you paid the right tax? That's a great question.
Oh, that is a great question. The pension company sends you a tax statement at the end of the year. I think it's a P60, like you would if you were employed, and you include that in your tax return. Because you only have to do a tax return if you've got relevant income. But if anybody asks questions, you can show them those P60s. It's always a good idea to keep records anyway, but the insurance company keeps them for you as well.
Totally. So I have two questions here about the life expectancy chart that you showed, talking about where to find something like that. I know that we do have something similar here, but yeah, there's some questions about those charts, because I think people do love to see those images, and honestly, I do think they're extremely, extremely helpful.
Yeah, literally, I cut and pasted them from if you Google ONS life expectancy, that should come up, life expectancy calculator. ONS stands for the Office for National Statistics. I use their statistics for all sorts of things, but mainly for life expectancy. They're complicated tables, which are difficult to read, but that calculator is so simple and straightforward. I think it's great.
And we do have a series of calculators and things ourselves, correct?
We do. We have an inheritance.
Sorry, that's putting you on the spot.
No, that's good. We've got an inheritance tax calculator, because I advise people a lot about inheritance tax as well as retirement planning. We've got an inheritance tax calculator. We've got a pension contribution calculator, which says if I'm contributing at this rate, what income can I expect? And we've got a sort of a at retirement calculator, which says here I am, what income can I expect?
And where can people find those?
They're on our website.
We can send them around in our email.
In the email, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Lisa. Okay, next question here. If your annual taxable income is under 12K, is there a higher tax-free saving level over £1,000?
There is. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but yes, there is an amount that if your only income is interest, you get a little extra over the £1,000.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
Next question here. Can you recommend a good source for info for understanding later life care costs, please?
age.org.uk, I think. That's where I go to find out these things.
Interesting. And I think that's a huge consideration that people need to take into account, right? Is the later life care costs is a huge retirement.
Yeah. I think the starting point is going to be £1,000 a week, but I know people who are spending 100,000 a year on care, because there's the residential part of it and then there's the care part of it. So it can take a lot of money.
Totally.
It's expensive. Okay. It is. Yeah.
Absolutely. Next question here. Lots of great questions here about pensions. If I have 3 pensions, do I get 25% of each one tax-free?
25% overall, taking them all together.
Okay. Next question here. Is taking money from a stocks and shares ISA subject to CGT?
No, the ISA protects you from capital gains tax. I love an ISA. I love a pension. I love an ISA. You don't pay income tax on interest or dividends in an ISA as they come in, and when you take the money out, it's just perfectly tax-free. The only tax you would pay on an ISA is inheritance tax.
Perfect. Okay, next question here. So, oh my God, these math questions are really scrambling my brain. I don't know how you do this, Lisa. Okay, question. Say your pension pot is worth 500K. You take the 25% tax-free when you first retire. Is the 375K left chargeable to income tax as you draw it down, or do you get 25% each time you withdraw?
If you take out, let's make the math easier for me, please. If you've got 400,000 in your pension pot and you take out 100,000, you've got no tax to pay at that point whatsoever. But you're left with 300,000 in your pension pot, and as you take it out of the pension pot, you start to pay income tax. So assuming you had no other income, you can take out, roughly speaking, £12,000 up to the personal allowance and pay no further tax. But once you're beyond the personal allowance, you pay 20% on the extra above the 20 allowance. It becomes normal income and is added to the rest of your income and taxed accordingly as you take it out. If you leave it in, it's not taxed. It's beautifully tax wrapped, no CGT, no nothing. But when you take it out, you pay income tax.
Great. Okay, next question here for you, Lisa. I hope you're okay with this rapid fire question.
Yeah, it's keeping my brain going, that's for sure.
And actually, as we are doing this, Laura, it would be great if you could get up the OneStep slide, because Lisa this is exactly what she does here at Charles Stanley, and this is a fabulous and amazing resource for everybody here. So Lisa, do you want to just give a little chat about what you get up to here at Charles Stanley, because you're doing so much good work?
Yeah, no, I mean, the stuff is complicated, and there's stuff that people don't know and they have questions about. And what I do is I help them answer those big financial questions. So I would get a lot of information from you. We'd have a few meetings, and I would tell you what you can do, what the opportunities are, and the pros and cons. And then you'd have a plan when you left, and I'd confirm it to you in writing. So it's one-to-one guidance and advice. They're sort of generic guides, but also what I find people find really helpful is when I'm talking about their situation and their questions. And that's what I'd love to do, is answer those questions so people understand where they are and what to do next. I don't do it in person, I do it via video, which is perfectly fine these days. There is a fee for it. And we've actually, for people who on this webinar, instead of it costing you £900, it'll cost you £840. And people find it helpful. They do like it.
Absolutely. I think one of the most helpful things I think that you do, Lisa, is you put together these amazing graphs and charts that are for people, right? You do these one-on-one sessions, you do these structured guides, calculation tools, really help people formulate a plan and then just send them on their way.
Yeah, draw a picture of the future for people so they understand.
Absolutely. So if anybody does want to hear more about the OneStep services that Lisa does have to offer, we have this little QR code in the right-hand corner, but you also can take a look at it. And we'll be sending you all of this information within the email that we do send along to you. Okay, here's a question. Have the LTA changes been agreed by legislation yet? If not, when is that expected? Do we know?
No, they haven't gone through legislation yet. I'm not sure exactly when that will be. Fine. It is worth mentioning about the LTA, if there's a change of government in the next general election, which I think has to be next year, Keir Starmer has said he's putting the LTA right back.
Here's great. Here's a question. Somebody is 55 and still has a mortgage. I intend to work for another 5-10 years and want to continue to build my pension pot. What are the impacts of me taking my 25% from my pension to pay off my mortgage? That's a great question.
The age at which you can take money out of your pension has gone up a little bit. I think it's either now 56 or 57 if you
I thought it was 57.
Yeah. So but that's a detail. The main question is, you can take your tax-free cash out. If you take any more than your tax-free cash, you then get limited in terms of what you can put back in. It's called the money purchase annual allowance. So instead of it being 60,000, it falls drastically, I think, to 10,000. So there's a lot less that you can put in. So it's to stop you sort of recycling money from a pension, really.
Totally. Okay. Next question here. I think you said 35 years NI contributions give you full state pension. Is that always the case? I asked because when I checked my NI contributions, the Gov website said that I needed to make 42 years of contributions. I currently have made 41 years of contributions. So it was saying that I need to make further years contributions. This might be
possibly that's because of having been contracted out. I would guess.
Yeah.
That would be that kind of thing. But 35 years would be normally the full state pension.
Yep. Okay. Next question here. I have many different pension pots from different workplaces. Should I consolidate them? Would it cost to do so? This is a great question.
If you have no specific guarantees in place, it's perfectly sensible to consolidate your pensions. If you're happy having many and you've got your eye on the ball and you can manage them all, fine and good. There doesn't have to be any cost to consolidate them if you do it yourself. Sort of if you decide to do it, for instance, via the Charles Stanley Direct website, this can happen. And there are no particular costs from our side, the receiving scheme. There may be exit costs from the leaving scheme, if you like. But in general, it's fairly easy to consolidate your pensions.
That's something that you deal with all the time, right? At Charles Stanley, people consolidating their pensions?
I can't give that specific advice, but I can talk around, the advantages and disadvantages of it. The question really for me is can you have a sort of a coordinated, consolidated investment strategy if your pots are all over the place?
Question here from Michael. Are you aware of any proposals to push the minimum pension age back further from the planned and announced rise to 57 in 2028? That was it. In 2028, it's going from 55 to 57. Any further announcements, Lisa?
The general plan is to make the minimum pension age 10 years before the state pension age. So when the state pension age, if and when it goes up, the minimum pension age will go up. So the two will be tied together.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Next question here. Is going over the LTA, in brackets, assuming it comes back, necessarily a bad decision? I appreciate this is a nice problem to have.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is a nice problem to have. I mean, if you're there, and there's nothing that you can do about it. The tax charge for exceeding the lifetime allowance was quite harsh. It was 55%, so well wipes out the tax relief that you get on the contribution. But even if you're paying 55% tax, you're still getting 45% of the rest. So it's not like you're getting nothing. So that's the LTA thing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, this is going to be the final question that we're going to be answering here. Just conscious of time here for today. We only do have this hour block, and we already have gone over. I have a DB pension that the sponsoring company is determined not to increase at all. Have you seen this elsewhere? Is this common?
I'm not sure what they mean by not increasing at all. So it's going to be level. Certainly DB schemes have shut. Some have said, okay, we're not contributing anymore. We'll contribute to a defined contribution scheme as our pension. We're not giving any more to the DB scheme or over certain limits. They literally are closing down quite widely in the private sector.
Fabulous. Okay, unfortunately, guys, that is all the time we have today for questions. Thank you all to each and every one of you for submitting those. Laura, if we could just get that OneStep slide back up here quickly. I'm just going to have Lisa's contact information as well as these OneStep plans up here quickly. Just want to, before we wrap, thank our speakers so very much for sharing their expertise and knowledge with us. And thank you to each and every one of you viewers here today for taking the time out of your day to drop in on this webinar. This is a medium that we would love to use more and more of going forward. We think it's such a great way to reach so many people, and we love to answer so many of these questions. We hope you learned something. We hope your questions were answered, and we hope to see you at webinars in the future. We do have a list of upcoming webinar topics if we want to take a look at that and when approximately they will be. So please do keep your eyes peeled or check on our events page to register there. Also, please do look out for an email from us shortly too. We'll be giving you a recording of this. We'll be giving you these slides. We'll be giving you contact information, everything that you need to be knowing. So please do keep an eye out for that as well. I'm just going to hold on the final slide that we have here before we say goodbye to you. A little thank you. So thank you again. Yeah, thank you all so much. And we love to host these things. So it's been great. And thank you so much again to Rob and to Lisa. Have a great day, everybody.